The world adored the golden Hollywood family, but behind the perfect photos and red carpet smiles, a storm was quietly tearing them apart. And at the center of it all stood Shiloh Jolie Pitt, the child born into fame, shaped by conflict, and forced to choose her own truth. What happened inside the home everyone believed was unbreakable. The origin of the Brangelina legend. Everyone remembers the fairy tale. Hollywood's most powerful man, Hollywood's most dangerous woman. Two stars whose names alone could bend the world's spotlight. But no one knew that the moment their eyes met on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith in 2003, a fuse had already been lit, one that would one day explode at the heart of their family. Brad Pitt was still the golden husband of America, married to its beloved sweetheart, Jennifer Aniston. Angelina Jolie was the untamed force of Hollywood, warrior, mother, rebel, and exile. Their connection, they insisted, was just friendship. Yet those on set whispered another story: the long glances, the quiet conversations, the magnetic pull neither could hide. As their friendship deepened, the world began to sense a shift. Jolie, already a mother to little Maddox from Cambodia, was building a life larger than the screen itself. Brad, drawn to her fire and conviction, stepped into that world without hesitation. By 2005, the marriage he had tried to protect was over, and a new empire was being formed. Together, they became unstoppable. Jolie adopted Zahara from Ethiopia. Brad followed by legally becoming father to both children in 2006. Their bond grew stronger, harder to deny, harder to ignore. Then came the moment that sealed their legend, the birth of their first biological child, Shiloh, in a remote hospital in Namibia. A child born into chaos, worship, and prophecy, presented to the world like royalty. Love, Brad said, isn't about blood. And for a moment, it looked like he was right. Because the family kept growing. Pax from Vietnam, then the twins, Knox and Vivienne, born in France as the world held its breath. The myth was complete. Jolie, the fearless mother, Pitt, the devoted father, 6 children encircling them like a living crown. A global dynasty. A perfect picture, but perfect pictures lie. Beneath the glow, pressure was building, secrets were forming, and the story the world thought it knew was already cracking from within. What truly held this legendary family together, and what would finally tear them apart? The children who carried the weight of a legend. In the glow of cameras and the roar of headlines, the Jolie Pitt children appeared untouchable. A modern royal line raised across continents, bound by love, destiny, and the myth of their parents. But behind the perfect photographs, each child carried a story the world never truly saw. Maddox came first, the quiet survivor from Cambodia. Jolie found him alone in a small orphanage, suspended in a wooden crib, as though waiting for someone who could rewrite his fate. Years later, Brad stepped into that role, adopting him as his own. To the world, Maddox was the heir, the one who called Pitt dad for the first time, the moment that convinced Angelina they were becoming a real family. But as he grew, the pressure of being the eldest in a collapsing empire would soon push him into the center of a storm. Zahara followed, fragile, sick, and fighting for life when Jolie held her for the first time. She survived salmonella, survived abandonment, and then rose into strength. Elegant, sharp-minded, fiercely independent. A girl who carried Africa in her blood and fire in her eyes. No one imagined she would one day stand as one of the family's most resilient pillars. Then came the one the world couldn't stop watching, Shiloh. The first biological Jolie Pitt child, born into flashbulbs, headlines, and global hysteria. From the moment she opened her eyes, she was labeled a symbol, an icon before she could walk. But behind the legend was a child searching for herself, navigating identity, expectations, and the cracks forming between her parents. Pax entered next, a boy from Vietnam who had already learned silence as survival. Jolie adopted him alone due to local laws, and Brad followed with a signature months later. He kept to the shadows, watching, absorbing, understanding more than he ever said. The world saw him as the quiet one. But quiet children often hold the heaviest truths. Then the twins, Vivian and Knox, arrived like a miracle at the height of the family's power. Born in France, greeted like royalty, their arrival sealed the illusion. The perfect six, a family built from every corner of the world, united under one name. But legends are burdens, and inside their home, the children were not symbols. They were witnesses. Witnesses to love, conflict, sacrifice, and eventually fracture. And as the cracks widened, it would be these children, not the parents, who revealed what really happened inside the world's most worshipped family. Which of them would become the first to break the silence? The fall of the Golden Couple. For years, the world believed the Brangelina Empire was unbreakable. 6 children, 2 global icons, a love story written across continents. But the truth is this: empires rarely collapse quietly, and theirs began to fracture long before anyone heard the first crack. It happened in the sky, far from cameras, far from witnesses, far from the Hollywood shine that had protected them for so long. A private jet, a family mid-flight, and a moment that would end everything. Reports whispered about shouting, about alcohol, about a son, Maddox, stepping between his parents to defend his mother. What happened next became the most guarded secret in Hollywood. Investigations were launched. The FBI stepped in. Child Services opened a file. Brad Pitt stayed silent, except for one confession months later. He had been drowning in alcohol, using it to numb emotions he no longer understood. Angelina filed for divorce the moment the plane touched the ground, and the world froze. The couple who had adopted nations, walked war zones, raised 6 children under a single roof, was suddenly shattered. But the public only saw half the story. Behind closed doors, accusations multiplied. Jolie claimed there had been abuse long before the jet incident. Pitt's team denied it, insisting the narrative had twisted beyond recognition. Their legal war grew teeth, sharp, merciless, personal. Every motion filed in court carried a new wound, every headline cut deeper, and caught in the crossfire were the children. Custody battles dragged on for years, each hearing reopening the scars of that infamous flight. Lawyers fought over therapy records, eyewitness accounts, patterns of behavior. Every detail of their private hell became ammunition in a war neither parent could afford to lose. The vineyard in France, once their shared dream, became another battleground. Pitt accused Jolie of selling her share behind his back. Jolie countered that Pitt demanded she sign a restrictive NDA meant to silence her about the darker parts of their past. The truth stayed buried beneath motions, redacted documents, and broken trust. But even as the legal firestorm raged, one thing became clear. Something had changed inside the Jolie Pitt home long before the world ever knew. Love had turned into distance, distance into resentment, resentment into fear, and fear into the kind of silence children never forget. Their marriage had been the story everyone admired. Their divorce became the cautionary tale Hollywood still whispers about. But the real mystery remains. What did the children see in those final years, and what secrets were they carrying in their silence? The custody war that tore a family in two. When the divorce papers hit the world, people thought the worst was over. They were wrong. The true battle, the one that would scar every child, was only beginning. And it unfolded not on red carpets or movie sets, but in the cold, airless corridors of courtrooms where love meant nothing and evidence meant everything. Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt stepped into the custody war like two generals who had already lost too much to retreat. 6 children stood between them: Maddox, Pax, Zahara, Shiloh, and the twins, Knox and Vivienne, each one holding memories neither parent could erase. At first, the hope of cooperation existed. Lawyers spoke of co-parenting, of stability, of the children's best interests. But with every hearing, with every accusation revived, with every sealed document quietly leaked, that hope decayed. Jolie requested primary custody. Pitt fought for equal rights, and the court became the stage for a truth too painful to speak aloud. Witnesses were interviewed, therapists testified, investigators revisited the flight that had destroyed the family. Every uncomfortable detail, every fear, every argument, every bruise on the heart was dissected under fluorescent lights. For the children, it was not justice. It was reliving a nightmare. Sources whispered that Pitt felt blindsided, desperate to prove he was still the father he once believed himself to be. Others murmured that Jolie was driven by protection, unwilling to risk history repeating itself. Their lawyers exchanged blows made of paperwork, motions, objections, sealed statements that hinted at ghosts the public would never fully see. Then came the breakthrough that wasn't truly a victory for anyone. Jolie would retain primary custody of the younger children: Shiloh, Vivienne, and Knox. Pitt would receive expanded visitation, a compromise he accepted with the exhaustion of a man who simply wanted peace. Behind the scenes, both were forced to concede pieces of themselves. Brad gave up the dream of full custody. Angelina surrendered the illusion of final victory. And the children watched their family become a legal battlefield where no one walked away whole. But even as the court stamped its verdict, the war wasn't finished. Disputes over the French vineyard erupted. Claims and counterclaims multiplied. And buried beneath all the legal chaos was a silent truth. The children were changing, choosing sides, withdrawing, breaking in ways neither parent could see clearly. And among them, one child, Shiloh, was beginning to pull away from the chaos altogether, ready to make a choice that would shock both Angelina and Brad. What decision was she preparing to make, and why did it terrify everyone involved? The night Shiloh disappeared. For years, Shiloh Jolie Pitt stood in the center of a storm she never asked for, pulled between two parents who once ruled Hollywood, now locked in a war that left no room for childhood. But no moment revealed the depth of her silent suffering more than the night she walked out of her home and didn't come back. It began quietly. A rumor, a headline, a whisper that Brad Pitt might be seeing someone new, someone with an uncanny resemblance to Angelina. The world shrugged, but inside Shiloh something cracked. She had watched her parents argue behind closed doors, watched their smiles fade, watched love rot into something sharp enough to cut every child who stood too close. But this, her father moving on, felt like betrayal layered on top of years of wounds she hadn't healed from. While her siblings tried to ignore the news, Shiloh spiraled. She had always been the peaceful one, the calm center, the child who hoped her parents might find their way back to the family they once pretended to be. Now even that fragile hope was gone. One afternoon, without a word, Shiloh left. No note, no warning, no destination. Angelina panicked first. Then the panic turned to terror. The staff searched the property, the streets, the familiar corners she liked to escape to. Nothing. Pax and Maddox were furious, blaming the emotional distance from their father, convinced the home wasn't safe for her anymore. Hours became a night. A night became the longest silence of Angelina's life. Reports later whispered that Brad had been devastated when he learned, that he blamed himself, his mistakes, his absence, his new relationship, his failure to shield his children from the battlefield their home had become. But Shiloh wasn't running away from one parent. She was running away from both, from the war that had swallowed her entire world. When she finally returned, it wasn't dramatic. She walked back through the door quietly, her eyes tired, her voice small. Angelina held her without asking questions, because the answer was already clear. Shiloh didn't need rescue. She needed space. Space from the yelling, from the lawyers, from the headlines, from the two people she loved most tearing each other apart. She had even tried to make peace, begging her parents to remember the years when laughter filled their home instead of bitterness. But children cannot heal wounds adults refuse to close. Shiloh came back physically, but emotionally, something had changed forever. She was no longer the child who believed she could fix her parents. She was the child preparing to choose her own path, one that neither Angelina nor Brad would be ready for. Because the next decision she made would shock the entire family and turn the custody war in a direction no one expected. The choice that shattered the silence. In every broken family, there comes a moment when a child must decide who they truly belong to. For Shiloh Jolie Pitt, that moment arrived quietly, without a fight, without tears, without the dramatic scenes Hollywood loved to imagine. It came as a whisper from a girl who had spent her entire life trapped between two worlds. As she approached adulthood, Shiloh began drifting toward Brad in ways no one could ignore. Their bond, subtle, tender, quietly rebuilt over time, grew stronger while the rest of the family remained divided. Brad, once the center of a scandal that nearly destroyed everything, found in Shiloh the one child willing to look past the chaos and see the father beneath the headlines. She visited him more, stayed longer, laughed more freely in his home than she had in years. And then, one day, she said the words neither parent expected, "I want to live with Dad." It wasn't a rejection of Angelina. It wasn't an accusation. It was exhaustion, the kind born from years of emotional fallout she could no longer carry. Brad was stunned, overwhelmed. Word spread that he was ecstatic, that the choice felt like redemption after years of being painted as a ghost in his own children's lives. To him, this was more than a daughter choosing a home. It was a daughter choosing him. Angelina, however, felt the blow like a knife between old scars. She had spent years holding the family together with trembling hands. And now, the daughter she raised with fierce devotion wanted to sleep under another roof. She disagreed. She resisted. But ultimately, she respected it. Because Shiloh wasn't a child anymore. She was a young woman fighting for her own peace, something neither parent had been able to give her since the family split. And even Angelina, through the shock and hurt, understood that painful truth. The homes weren't far apart, just a short drive. Close enough for Shiloh to see her mother and siblings whenever she wanted. But emotionally, the distance was enormous. The shift in gravity within the Jolie Pitt family was unmistakable. Some siblings supported her choice, some resented it. Others simply stayed silent, because in this family, every opinion had consequences. But Shiloh's decision wasn't about sides. It wasn't about loyalty. It was about survival. She needed something different. A change of air. A father who was finally present. A space untainted by years of whispered arguments and lingering resentment. And yet, beneath her quiet courage, one question haunted everyone around her. If Shiloh chose Brad, who would she turn her back on next? The woman who became Shiloh's unexpected refuge. In the wreckage of the Jolie Pitt breakup, when every room in the house felt heavy with arguments and unspoken wounds, Shiloh found comfort in a place no one expected, Jennifer Aniston. What began as brief, polite visits turned into quiet moments of laughter and calm, something Shiloh hadn't felt in years. Jennifer didn't try to win her over or replace anyone. She simply offered a gentleness untouched by the chaos surrounding the family. For a girl raised in the crossfire of two global icons, that simplicity felt like a rare kind of freedom. Brad noticed the shift almost immediately. Shiloh seemed lighter, more grounded, her smile no longer forced or fragile. Their connection grew naturally, built not on history, but on honesty. And then came the confession that would shake the entire family. Shiloh admitted she sometimes wished she could call Jennifer Mom. Those words carried no rebellion, only longing. Longing for stability, for warmth, for a version of family that didn't feel like a battlefield. But for Angelina, who had fought for her children with unbreakable intensity, the revelation struck like a reopened wound. Jennifer, sensing the delicate line she had crossed without meaning to, stepped back with quiet dignity. She never encouraged the title, nor tried to fill a role that wasn't hers. Yet the bond between her and Shiloh remained, soft, steady, and impossible to ignore. Caught between the mother who raised her, the father rebuilding himself, and the woman who provided unexpected refuge, Shiloh found herself standing at a crossroads. And for the first time, she wasn't defined by the legacy of her parents' war, but by the shape of the peace she was trying to find for herself. Who do you think had the biggest influence on Shiloh's choice? Angelina, Brad, or Jennifer Aniston?